Well, thank you everybody for joining Cafecito Chat. I'm pretty sure that everybody's heard about the whole situation in San Diego about the mosque attack and whatnot, and the attempted or shootings of some individuals, and that has had repercussions across the nation, right? It's not the first time, it's not the only time that this has happened, but it is something that will continue to show its ugly face to some extent, and that's why I bring the topic to the table, right? Love, peace, tolerance equals harmony. So, that being said, is what does that really mean? Tolerance in everyday life. We're not necessarily just gonna focus on the shooting situation that happened, but in everyday life. Tolerance to each other when you're driving in traffic, somebody passes you, cuts you off, you chase them. And there's actually a series called Beef, and the first season in Netflix actually talks about road rage and how this particular series goes a little bit to the extreme, but it could be possible where somebody honks at somebody getting out of the actual parking lot area, and the individual driving that got honked at gets really upset and follows this individual. And I've seen this happen on the highway where somebody, for some reason they put their blinker on and all of a sudden they cut into the next lane too close. Somebody decides to throw whatever they have in their hand through the window at the other car. Somebody cuts them off, chases them for a couple miles, and it's incredible to witness, to be honest with you, but it does happen. The other is impact of hate and division, the conversations that we see, that we hear, the words that are coming from some individuals at levels of different power structures. How does that really shape into the work culture? The government agencies also impact the whole community at large with some of the words and the hate that is coming and the division that is taking place. And then a couple other things that we're going to focus on, try to explore, is creating spaces of peace and belonging. We've seen that over the last maybe 2, 3 decades, there was a huge push to create spaces of peace and belonging within the corporations. Organizations such as SHIP, which is this one, NESB, SWE, SASE, other organizations that are focusing on the outside to help and support minorities to feel appreciated, to show that they belong in different spaces of the industry and corporations. Some of those have been slowly being come dismantled and slowly been pressured and squeezed hard to have some of those volunteers and those efforts go dormant to some extent. We've seen that. And then ultimately, when you're faced with some of those situations, do you actually choose to be human about it? Do you actually choose to take the higher ground? Do you actually choose to show empathy towards your fellow individuals? That's the conversation that we're going to try to bring to the table today. So, with that being said, I know that you're kind of far away from San Diego now, Diego, and at this point, though, over in Oregon, over the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of unrest and a lot of hot tempers to some extent, at least from what the news media broadcasting has indicated. But at your personal experience, at your level, how do you see this whole situation evolving? And what is your take on the tolerance in everyday life? And as an example, road rage. Is that something that you've experienced, or is that something that you haven't experienced? How do you deal with that, Diego?
Um, to answer your second question, I do my best to just, be patient. I think patience is key, and, having a good amount of patience, you learn to tolerate, the little mistakes that people make because, at the end of the day, everyone is human. So, so dealing with that and having patience with everyone and, with patience comes peace. So yeah, that's how I answer your second question. I'm sorry, what was your first question? It was a little bit loaded.
Yeah, so the first question is, how are things up in your area, up in Puget Sound, with everything that's been going on at the national level, hot tempers, division? Is that something that's very tangible or not really noticeable, and the media exaggerates it?
Okay. Thank you for repeating the question. Everything has been, from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, pretty calm up here in the Puget Sound. I sometimes I drive on the freeway, and I don't know if you guys see this in California, but on some of the freeway, sometimes the freeways have pedestrian bridges where you can cross over, and so there have been some people, they put up signs that say, "Oh, war, not peace." I'm sorry, peace, not war. Sorry about that. And just and other posters that say, spread love and love everyone in peace. And so, if anything, there have been peaceful ways of getting messages across up here in the Puget Sound, from what I've experienced.
Okay, no, that's good. Yeah, over here in California, at least in San Diego, we do. I personally have seen over the highways, there's pedestrian bridges or streets that cross over the highways, and some individuals actually put posters or big banners of sort that do say peace, not war, or they say we support XYZ when it was the Ukraine frenzy. That was very common when you actually see Black Lives Matter. There was posters about that, banners about that. So we do see that here in California. That's very common, at least here in San Diego. Lourdes, you are up in the San Luis Obispo area. Any thoughts or any comments, concerns about the whole situation about hate speech and division being promoted?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's terrible. Before it was socially known and acceptable that if you had those thoughts, you just don't say them, right? If you don't have nice things to say, just don't say them. But now with everything changing politically and whatnot, people feel more entitled to say these negative and bad things about people, which I'm like, I do know how we got here, but I'm still kind of shook about it. Um, Slow is kind of interesting in the sense that there's some areas that are really democratic and there's some areas that are really conservative, but there has been protests here, like the No Kings protests and whatnot, and same thing with the bridges. So it's a really good mix of everything.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Mr. Mike Cruz, I'm pretty sure that you've been following the local media and the whole situation that I brought forth about the mosque being attacked by a couple local teenage shooters, 18, I believe, 17, and 18, 19, somewhere around there, two individuals. And I think, I mean, this whole situation is not necessarily new. It's to some extent has been semi-normalized, which is wrong, right? That should not happen. However, over the last 20, 30 years, this has become more prevalent. And I want to get your thoughts on the whole situation as we talk about peace, tolerance, and love equals harmony.
Yeah, I think I got three-part answer here. The first one is social media. When I first heard about it and what it was, the first thing came to my mind was a double-edged sword. There's going to be a lot of good from social media, and there's going to be a lot of nefarious things from social media, and we're finding out that both are occurring. Social media has helped us out a lot to communicate and talk with other, even though it's not face to face. But at the same time, it's been a platform for the harbingers of doom, if you will. They have a platform, and they get out and they reach out, and I think like the news reports on the two young men that did this thing in San Diego, that they got online, they didn't know each other, they met, they said they were both in San Diego, they got together, and through social media they had the like-minded thoughts about other people in a disparaging way. So social media really has allowed us to degrade ourselves as a nation, I think. It is what it is. I mean, it's happening, and social media is a big context to that. So with that in mind, that's the vehicle that allows us to do great harm to our nation. But get down to a more personal level. When I was working, my philosophy was, as a business manager, I was a conflict avoider. So that means that I avoided conflict, and I'll go with Diego. You have to listen to other people when they have issues and make some claims. Listen to them, see if you can empathize with them, see if you can calm them down, and try and understand where they're coming from. Understanding is a big element of patience, because if you sit there and you don't think about what's happening and try and evaluate it, then you're not going to move forward. You have to say, what's wrong? What can I do? What are the instruments that are causing this effect? And how can I mitigate it and help him or her, and help others around us? So as a conflict avoider, that's been my philosophy in business life, and as well as personal life. You want to please everybody if you can, and you want to be somebody that is not going to generate conflict. And so that's my personal view. So as a real life experience, I didn't have somebody on the highway that cut me off or anything, but I did have an incident down in San Diego, down on the waterfront. We we were having lunch down at the Brigantine, and I pulled into the parallel parking. In parking, and I parked. We were in a handicap area, and then a car came up close to us and got out, and they were over the line. And if you're over the line in a handicap, you get a ticket. So a man came out and a woman came out, and I said, "Hey, ma'am, you parked over the line. You can get a ticket." I was trying to be helpful. But even being helpful, the husband came over and jumped on me. "Hey, my wife is pregnant. Leave her alone." Da, 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 da. And he was really mad because I had talking to her that way. I said, "Hey, you need to move your car over." Da, 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 da. And I'm going, "Oh, okay." So I didn't exacerbate the situation. I heard him, what he was talking about. Okay, you got a pregnant wife. And I explained to him that if you parked over the line, you could get a ticket. I was just trying to help you out. Well, we were in lunch, about 30, 40 minutes later, the husband came over to me and apologized. He says, "I'm sorry. My wife's just pregnant with our second child. I was all nervous about it, and it was kind of a misunderstanding, and I'm sorry that I snapped at you." So again, patience and trying to understand the situation may give you better results. But this whole, we've been saying love and peace since the '60s, since the Haight-Ashbury days, and when I was riding my bike around the United States, I had my peace symbol with me, and a couple of people commented on that and said, "Hey, I understand what the symbol is, da 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 da." But doggone it, when you look at the world in general, I always say, why do we have to have bad people? I mean, that's my basic question in life. Why do we have to have bad people? And I can't answer that one, but we do, and we have to deal with it. And you have your religions that deal with peace and honor and love, and we promote that. We talk about it. We say that. But again, there's some human beings out there that think that they have to take a negative action against their fellow man. I still don't understand it after 80 years. It's mind-boggling. We should have moved on. I mean, we're in the 2026, and I just don't understand. Like these young kids, how do they how did they fester themselves? What was their family life like? You know, I guess the mom said that he was psychotic. You know, he had some mental issues. The one kid had some mental issues. So, I mean, we can't. That's part of human natures, and we have to deal with that. And so, I guess maybe mental issues are maybe a major cause of all these things that do happen. People just think that they have to do something. But peace, love, tolerance. I mean, we've said it, we've sang it, we've lived it, we marched it, and yet we still have things like this happening. And like you had mentioned, it's been normalized, and that's the worst thing. That's the worst thing can happen to a nation, that we normalize this type of activity. And we still have this gun issue. You know, people have access to firearms that they can use to go and destroy other people. So there's a lot of issues that we know about. Congress has addressed them. Our state, local governments have addressed them. But we still have what happens, and we keep on saying it's not going to happen in our backyard. And lo and behold, you know, this is right up the street from my friend that he lives on Ashford Street, just down from the mosque. And if you remember years ago, some guy got in a tank at the armory down the road there and rode a tank up Oxford Street toward the mosque area.
Right. That was back in 1990, 1995, 1996.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and his house was actually in the newspaper because they passed his house. And then you have to remember back all the negative things that I remember in San Diego. We had the killing down in San Isidro with some guy with an AR or something, shot 15 or 20 people out of a McDonald's restaurants. How awful was that? And we made a memorial there. So we have a memorial for what that happened. And I don't know if you remember, but Susan Spencer had a bad day on Monday, and she sat outside and shot her teacher from in the schoolyard. So you know, it doesn't happen every day, but it does happen. And since we have nationwide coverage now and worldwide coverage of everything, we get to see all the bad stuff. We do get, and the news media, you know, sensationalism gets readers and followers. And so what do they publish? All the catastrophes and disasters and shootings and whatever. That's mainline news for them. We still have happy portions in the newspaper, but they're on page 7, 8, and 9, not on the front page. So to make a long story short, you know, we need to keep professing tolerance, peace, love, and we're going to have to deal with the fact that the world, the life is going to bring us some negative aspects of the world. So with that, I have a light comment, if you will. I got it from the newspaper. I was reading the newspaper, and it kind of sums up the whole thing about the world. God is making these people, and He's on a conveyor belt, like a cookie, making a gingerbread man cookies on a conveyor belt, you know. And so God is making all these cookies, which are people. And he says, I think I'll throw in and I think 1 out of and 10% I'll throw in a jerk. God will throw in a jerk, just because. You know, I'm going, you know what? That's where we are. 10% or 1% of our population is can't deal with society, and they take adverse action, and so that's reality.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll go away. We have to mitigate it. And again, remember, this is how much centralization did we get out of this one aspect of 3 people getting killed at a mosque? You know, on and on and on, and so that even makes it even more in our minds to remember those things. And that's, I guess that's the worst part of it, that we get to remember those negative things in what happens to us, and we need to and the good things we enjoy, but we don't remember them as much, and that's part of our mindset.
Right. And I think possibly with so this my perspective is this whole thing is insidious, right? I mean, it comes from the words that we hear, the things that we see, not necessarily the move. I mean, there's movies that promote violence, and they've always been like that. War movies from World War II, Vietnam era, Korea. Now you have a lot of CGI movies with the Avengers and Marvel heroes and whatnot. So there's a lot of violence out in the industry. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying I'm against it, but I do believe that it does influence and it's insidious because it creeps up on you, right? And let's say for Mr. Mike Cruz, myself, and I would even venture Alex, we're older, so we grew up in a different era. But for Lourdes and Diego, I believe both of you, you grew up with social media. I mean, you had the phone or YouTube in the palm of your hands. I don't remember when actually Instagram showed up, but I know that you grew up with Facebook and you grew up with YouTube and you could Google stuff all over the place. For us three, Mike Cruz, myself, and Alex Polo, if we wanted to learn about anything, we had to go to the library, read the newspaper, look at news articles, like physically look at the newsletters, and actually find an encyclopedia information. It wasn't readily available through Google. So that's something that slowed down a lot of the violence, quote unquote, propaganda that's now shown. So I want to get your perspective. How do you see the world in retrospect if you could possibly compare to some extent the lack of having access to social media from your early ages? And I'm going to go with Diego Martinez first.
So you want me to compare the world now to how I grew up in terms of how information was gained?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. No, yeah, I mean, well, growing up, I would still go to the library and things like that, and if I wanted to learn honestly about anything, I would check out a book and read it. But yeah, but it's just just in this day and age, it's more convenient to just we have information right in our pocket, just look it up on our phones and Google, and it's I think so. Yeah, it's just more convenient nowadays. But I think we could also throw in the topic of how easy it can be dangerous, because now in this day and age we don't know what's real and what's not. So as opposed to back then, you know when you have to actually physically go pick up a book, that's fact, because no one would question a book. But as opposed to now, with AI and misinformation and all that, you kind of have to really do your research. And then for someone who maybe doesn't have time to do that, they kind of just believe the first thing that they see. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does answer the question. Lourdes, from your perspective, and I'll get to you, Mr. Mike Cruz, or yeah, Lourdes first and then Mr. Mike Cruz.
Yeah, so I was the generation that saw both. Like, I remember I was in 10th grade when Facebook was a big deal, Instagram was a big deal, when the phones went from flip phones to like the full screen. So I remember both. And because of that, I also graduated before AI was the main thing, you know? So I've seen it. I've really been through the changes and whatnot. Uh, I remember going to the library and reading a book and checking out a book and whatnot. I still like reading, so I still do that. But I think the accessibility of it all, the media platforms that people have to either speak hate is very damaging, because when you follow an algorithm or you tend to like things, the algorithm will only show you things that are very similar to you, right? And if you're not interested, it can put you in a very specific kind of pool of just people who kind of think like you and agree with you, not show you different perspectives unless you go out of your way and research, which makes you think, oh, everybody thinks the same way I do. So it's hard to understand how people from such different point of views think they're doing something right, or think they're, like when they do crazy things like this. Yeah, I think we need to cut back a little bit on screens and really connect us people and whatnot.
Thank you, Lourdes. Great insight. Mr. Mike Cruz, you had a
Yeah,
comment.
I think Lawrence just points out the amount of misinformation and information you get immediately on hand. But it brought to mind, back in the 50s and 60s, if you wanted to read about something that was tragic, murders, killings, or whatever, you remember the magazines? I don't. You were too young, maybe, but in the 50s and 60s, they had these detective magazines that had, people that got murdered, and then have bloody pictures and stuff like that. I mean, but you had to go ahead and buy the magazine to see some of that stuff, and you had to be into it. And so it was very sparse, I think, compared to the social media today. So we did have access to detective stories and murders and photos and stories that went on, but I think it was very, very limited compared to today. I mean, today's the social media and AI and all that. It's instantaneous, and I think it overwhelms us at time of all this negative actions that we see brought on by our neighbors and our friends and our peers. So I think growing up, I had less exposure to death and destruction, so to speak, because we had to go to either buy a magazine or just on the newspaper. And in the newspapers, you know what the biggest thing that would really uh, uh, grab your attention was a car crash when somebody got killed in it. They would show the photos of the car and I mean, that was the news of the day, and that was like a onesie twosie thing. Uh, and we did not grow up with, just it just saddens me to think about schools having armed guards. That really saddens me. I mean, that's where our society has gone to. I mean, we went to school. There were no fences around the schools. We walked to school. It was open. You met your friends on the way. You went home. You played in the afternoon. You came home when it got dark. Your mom and dad didn't worry about where you were or where you gone. But on Saturdays you disappeared for the day and go with your friends. So society has really changed. I mean, when I pass a grade school in the morning and I see each parent driving their students to class and making sure they can get off in front of the school and into the classroom. And then you look at the school, and I live down here in the South Bay, and all the grammar schools they're gated. They got iron fences around the whole schools. That's sad.
Yeah.
That's sad. But that's where we are, because we have people out there that are armed, basically with guns, and they can create harm to our population. So that's a sad commentary on our society today, but there's also a lot of goodness. So we have to remember there's a lot of good things that we enjoy in life. We take walks, we go to the park, we go swimming, we go to the beaches, we go to the mountains. So there's a lot of good activity out there also. But when you pass a school by, you're reminded when we went to Hilltop High School, it was all gated. You have to go into the main office and you get a badge and they screen you and you got to show your ID just to come on campus. But that's where we are. It's a protectionist society that we have today.
You're right, Mr. Mike Cruz, and you and I do hang out a lot and go to a lot of local high schools here in the South Bay and in Chula Vista predominantly, and South Bay area, Morris High School as well.
Yeah,
So
Otay Ranch is just getting the new fences, remember?
correct. So, and that's where I was heading. My comment was heading towards. In the past, we could simply park and literally walk in. We find out exactly what room we were headed to. We didn't really have to check into the office. And over the years, it slowly started to change. First, you had to go check in. They do your ID verification. They give you a pass, and you could walk in. But it was still quote unquote semi-open campus, right? I remember maybe a year, 2 years ago, at a lot of high schools, they started putting up fences, right? And that to me, I'm like, wait a minute. I've seen my wife remembers that in Los Angeles, to get into the high schools, you have to go through some metal detectors in some of them, right? So there's areas where there's metal detectors where you actually have to go in and get into the actual school. But I hope we don't get to that in the local San Diego area where we have to actually look at metal detectors as a possible solution. That's assuming that the threat is of students. When the threat comes out from the outside, like individuals that we're talking about, how do you deal with that? That's an interesting situation. It's very hard. We've seen that, okay, maybe an actual security guard can help, but is that the real long-term solution? The next phase of the conversation is creating spaces of peace and belonging, right? So, spaces of peace and belonging. School should be a place of learning, not a place to worry, not a place to fear for your life, not a place to have doors that go on lockdown if somebody sounds the alarm. Even churches or mosques or places of religion, congregation, you shouldn't be fearful about who comes in and who is going to start shooting randomly. That is an awful thought. So just how do you create places of peace and belonging, right? And that's something that I really want to understand and try to see and focus and get your perspective, but not only outside, but also in the workplace. In the workplace, I know that we have ERGs, or we had ERGs, predominantly over the last, as I mentioned earlier, about 20 years ago. It was a big effort for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Companies were putting money on the table, creating budgets for those particular groups within the corporations, and they were asking people, employees, to be leaders of those particular ERG, employee resource groups, to go ahead and have that place and sense of belonging for the employee population. Over the last 2 years, I've started noticing dramatically and drastically a lot of companies pulling back, a lot of companies not supporting the employee efforts that were made over the last 20 years, which affects SHIP, which affects NSBE, which affects SWE, which affects SACE. I mean, all those external organizations are going back, from my perspective, to the 70s or even to the early beginnings of the maybe civil rights activism that actually took place. The 90s, early 2000s were a place of growth and thriving, where some of those organizations and some of those institutions actually flourished, honestly, and skyrocketed. If you notice, there's not a lot of support in a lot of those companies now to actually have, in particular in STEM, that's the field that I know, to go ahead and provide that support. Why? Because to some extent, some individuals at the top have been verbal and have felt that, hey, this could be considered discrimination. Is that right or is that wrong? I believe that that's incorrect because that's a perception. We are talking about belonging. And I know, Mr. Mike Cruz, in previous episodes, you've said, hey, I was the only Latino and I felt this difference. However, I focused on my job, which is great, is correct. But at the same time, you've also indicated, you've voiced that you've missed out in your culture, in your belonging, in the identity that you held and that you hold up until today. Where these type of groups actually create that platform of belonging for the employees to feel valued, to feel that they actually are part of that particular corporation and that group. So that's where I'm coming from. So let me see if I can get a perspective from Diego Martinez, that you work at Boeing Corporation. Any thoughts on, you belong to SHIP, you were part of SHIP for a couple of years at UCSD. Now that you're over at Boeing, how do you feel? Is there a Boeing Latino community that you are part of? I know that in the last few years, a few decades ago, there was a huge effort, but now I don't know if there's really that much support inside of Boeing per se. Diego?
Yeah, the Boeing ERG for the Hispanic community is still around. We still host events. However, I have been told by board that funding has been slashed. Not just, and this isn't just specific for the Hispanic ERG. This is specific for all the ERGs throughout Boeing. So we are still here. However, we are very cautious about the type of events that we promote, how we promote them, and which leaders we talk to possibly try and get a little more funding to be able to host certain events.
Mhm. And that's only internal, because externally, you can't really, as a corporation, they're not supporting external organizations such as SHIP, NESB, SWE. All that external support has gone away for the better part, right? I mean, I don't know if entirely, but I know that publicly they stated we are not supporting those type of organizations. We can support STEM, or we can support some other non-government organizations that are not identifying with any type of affinity group. Diego?
Yeah, no, and so I'll add, so along, as you mentioned, I was a part of SHIP at UCSD. I am also a part of SHIP up here in the Puget Sound, and it's the exact same way. You said, we same thing in the Puget Sound. Whenever we want to collaborate, not just with Boeing, but any other company up here in the Puget Sound, we are careful about how we promote, and we advertise it as promoting STEM, but sometimes we take out the Hispanic part, even though it is a SHIP sponsored event. And just real quick, and this was even true on the collegiate level. I don't know if you know this, Lazaro, but my graduation ceremony from Raza, the coordinator told me we called this oh shoot, Futuro something. But the point is that they didn't call it UCSD Raza Resource Center Hispanic graduation or whatever. They were they're very careful about how they named the graduation ceremony, because they didn't want it to get canceled for political reasons coming from UCSD.
Right. And I remember you and I had this conversation, and that's really, really, to some extent, sad that as a collective community, we have to mask our identities and our efforts and our actual effort to impact that particular group, right? And because when you say raza, I know that you're literally focusing on Latinos, Hispanic, trying to motivate others to pursue higher education, to visualize and see themselves and empower them to continue in whatever pursuing their dreams, right? Ultimately, that's the goal. If somebody else, as advocates, want to go ahead and support and continue moving forward in that path, they're more than welcome to join. We're not excluding those individuals. That's part of what SHIP, NESB, SWE, we interact with all of them. So it's not that it's exclusive. It's if you yourself decide to exclude yourself, that's your personal decision. That's a personal choice. That's a personal effort that you're going to take. However, by being told you can't have this place or this group of belonging because it discriminates, I believe that is incorrect and that is wrong. Lourdes, any comments or thoughts in regards to the conversation that we're having as far as creating spaces of belonging and spaces of peace?
Um, I think spaces of belonging and peace are really important and critical. So people feel like they align with some people culturally, or maybe they just feel more comfortable. Like with Ship, I could speak in Spanish and English and switch, and it wasn't a problem, right? I wouldn't do that if I were going to a SWE, unless it's just knowing how to behave in a certain space just made me more comfortable, right? Um, I think it's important. I think it's critical for success, for people's success and also diversity, right?
Yeah.
We're doing so well, and then you know what's happening. All the bad things are happening, but I think the efforts still continue, and people can find community. It's just harder, It's they have to know somebody who knows about it, like Diego was saying, or they have to know the right person who's putting on the event, and you're kind of excluding people because sometimes you just don't know who you're supposed to know to be invited or be part of the spaces. So, yeah, I definitely align with your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. And this takes me back. I think there's a movie or a series or something like that in Netflix. But I read about this when I was in high school. It's when in the South, when individuals, Black individuals, African Americans were traveling in the South from the North to the South, they had to have a green book, which told them where to stay that was friendly for them, right? That was not going to cause or generate any problems. And when I say stay, you couldn't just pick a Motel 6 or Motel 8 or whatever it was. You had to stay at certain places. You had to put gas in certain places that was friendly to you. So that's kind of what it takes me back to when you mentioned, Lourdes, Diego, that you have to know the right person, that you have to be able to speak and share the information. You can't openly advertise events for the particular activity that you're going to be holding because you are afraid of repercussions or reprimanded for whatever the activity really wants to focus on. Even though it's STEM, even though it's part of the industry, just because you want to give it that twist of Latinos, it's an interesting situation. So just make sure that we don't go all the way back to that era, right? Where we're going to be fearful for our lives. And I hope we never get there again. Mr. Mike Cruz, any final thoughts?
Yeah, the Green Book is an interesting concept that Blacks had to live by. But you look at the national our government at the national level down in the South, and the redistricting that's going on and trying to push people back to Jim Crow area. That's something we have to live with. It has never gone away. The feelings of one group superior over another. It's never gone away. It's always been here, and I think it probably always will. There's that human philosophy of I got to be better than somebody else permeates the disenfranchisement of certain peoples. It's something we have to live with. But let me say one thing. Back in the 90s, we actually had inclusion. We actually had safe spaces. I was on the Advisory Council for Hispanic Employment. This was a group of senior Navy managers that came together under the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower. So we had a high level government backing. We didn't have too much funding, but we came together, and they actually promoted the fact that we needed more minorities in the Navy. And we had numbers that they were very low. We wanted to bring them up, et cetera, et cetera. I think back then there may be like 10 or 15% of the Hispanic community was in the high level positions. I imagine if you look at the number today, it may have doubled up to maybe 10 to 20%, but we're still very low numbers. And as a nation, we're trying to work on it. But with the current administration is just slowing all that down. It's not going to disappear. It's not going to disappear. And diversity will, as a good thing in our workforce, I think it'll come back because our nation is built upon diversity, and it will come back. But it will be a difficult time. It will be a difficult time. Uh, yeah. I just shake my head because I know we could do better. I know that we can do better as a nation and as a people, and we have to keep trying to do that. So let's try peace. Let's keep it, in our minds. Let's try tolerance. But we got to remember that 1% of our population they can't deal with it, and we're going to have to deal with them.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mike Cruz. Lourdes, any final thoughts?
I agree with Mike, and also I think Latinos have a lot of power, buying power and whatnot. Let's not underestimate our potential in unifying and whatnot. Like, we can pressure people to do the right things through different ways.
Yeah, real quick, we have to remember that DEI and our current administration is going away. I mean, they flaunted that, but there are large organizations, companies that are not government dependent that are still advocating for DEI and diversity and inclusion. And guess what? They're going to reap the benefits. When the government shuts those people away, those other companies are going to reap the benefits of diversity. And I think that's still going to, and we have companies in San Diego that are non-government oriented, and we have very, very good support from them. And I think that will continue.
Thank you, sir. Diego, any final thoughts?
Yeah, two things. One, I hope that the audience that listens to this remembers that hate isn't a gene. You're not born with hate. It's taught. All these negative things are taught. So I hope that we as a society do a better job at promoting, and not just promoting, teaching love and respect. And that's something, when I one day have children, that's something that I will, or not just when I have children, just in general, if I see someone doing something, saying something wrong, I hope people have the courage to educate someone or people and say, hey, what you're saying is not correct. That's the first thing. Second thing, Lázaro, you started off the conversation when you got to me by saying that I no longer live in San Diego, but arguably I spent the four most important years of my life in San Diego. It was my second home for 4 years. And that being said, I was hurt by what happened in San Diego because the city welcomed me, and I still have ties. I still keep in touch with some people in San Diego. So even though I'm not there, I'm sending love, peace, and tolerance from up here in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diego. That's great information, great insight. And yes, once it does affect all of us. And yes, going back to the opening statements, this whole situation about the shooting at the mosque has been to some extent normalized. I don't believe that it should be, even though it's one incident. It should still be alerting us and putting this red flag warning for us to say, hey, what can we do? How can we be better individuals? How can we bring out the humanity and empathize with our fellow individuals, fellow peers on the highway, in the classroom, on the job site, right next to our desk, or even if we're working remote? How can we check in with some of those individuals and let them know, hey, how's everything going? Are you doing okay? What's going on? And when we go to social events, be it for SHIP, NSBE, SWE, whatever events that we end up going, empathize with those individuals, and also try to definitely lead by example. That's the whole thing. Leading by example. You could say many things, but if you turn around and do something else, like we see at the top level government agencies, that leads you to believe, okay, this is being normalized, bad behavior is being normalized. However, if you know the Bible back and forth, is that really what you are trying to preach, my friend? So I'm just saying, without naming anybody, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, but that's part of the situation. I think a lot of individuals, a lot of population really believes in the leadership, and sadly enough, they take it literally. And part of that is getting converted into bad actions, right? Because they are being called to action and they believe that it's their duty to go ahead and act on those words of hate. Going back to Diego, it is a thought, it's thought that actually gets imparted on those individuals. So they act on it. So for us to continue moving forward, just be good humans, continue bringing out the humanity in all of us, be empathetic, and lead by example. I believe that's the best thing that we can do, and I hope that we end in a positive note, that we will continue moving forward, and that we will continue doing what we do best, which is being good individuals, good citizens, not just from San Diego or from California or from Puget Sound, Oregon area, but at a global level, right? So let's have that example showcased throughout the world. With that, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Hasta luego. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.